The following program, Search the Scriptures, is brought to you by the Highway 5 South Church of Christ in Mountain Home. Speakers are Keith Sharp and Trevor Campbell. We invite you to call or write the church to submit questions for the speakers to answer. We'll provide answers from the Bible to your questions.
Trevor, we know that Jesus died on the cross during the week of the Passover, right. And we know that he was raised from the dead, and we know that now he's in heaven. But we have a question that we need to address today. Where was Jesus between the time of his resurrection and the time that he ascended, or actually, during the time between his death and his resurrection? Yeah. And so that's the question we have. That's a question we were given, so we'll deal with that today.
Sounds
Trevor,
good.
are you going to have a good answer for that?
I'll do what I can.
Okay. Trevor, go ahead and introduce yourself, please.
Sure, yeah. My name is Trevor Campbell, and I'm a preacher, and I worship in Payette. And there, you'll see on the screen there the address of our congregation. We're on Highway 62 on the north side of the highway in Payette. The phone number there is mine. It's 870-435-2737 if you have a question for the program or if you have just any questions at all. And then also you'll see the meeting times there of where I worship. Bible class is 10 a.m. and worship is 10:45 a.m. on Sundays. And we invite you out to both of those. We'd love to have you.
And of course, I'm Keith Sharp. I preach at the Highway 5 South Church of Christ in Mountain Home. We invite you to come to our services. Our building is 1 mile south of the Highway 62-412 bypass on Highway 5 on the way down toward Calico Rock, towards Norfolk. And you can stop there at 10 o'clock on Sunday morning. We have Bible classes for all ages, including the children. And you can come at 11 o'clock on Sunday morning. We have a worship assembly. And again, we have a worship assembly at 2 o'clock on Sunday afternoon. We have our Wednesday evening worship assembly and Bible study at 7 o'clock. You're invited to all of those services. And remember our ladies class at 10 o'clock on Wednesday morning. Very excellent ladies Bible class that we'd like for you ladies to come and be a part of. So those are the services of the Highway 5 South Church of Christ. And you can be in touch with me, Keith Sharp, to let me have a question. That's what we do on this program, is deal with the questions that we're asked. And that number to call if you have a question from me is 870-321-5746. Or if you prefer, you can email me at keithsharp@suddenlink.net, or you can write a letter if you prefer to Post Office Box 263 in Mountain Home, 72654. Let us know what your questions are. We'll answer your questions on the air. All right, the question we have before us then this morning, Trevor, or this evening, excuse me, the question we have before us is, where was Jesus between the time of his death and the time of his resurrection from the dead? Yeah. So I'm going to turn it over to you.
All right. Well, it's a good question. I think that I'm not sure how you're going to tackle this one, but I'm going to start in Matthew chapter 12.
Okay.
And in Matthew chapter 12, Jesus told at least where his physical body would be after his death. It says in 12:38, then some of the scribes and Pharisees answered, saying, Teacher, we want to see a sign from you. But he answered and said to them, an evil and an adulterous generation seeks after a sign, and no sign will be given to it except the sign of the prophet Jonah. For as Jonah was 3 days and 3 nights in the belly of the great fish, so will the Son of Man be 3 days and 3 nights in the heart of the earth. So, at least for his physical aspect, Jesus was in the heart of the earth, he says.
All right.
Yeah.
So that's where his physical body was during the time that he was dead.
Yeah.
And all right, thanks, Trevor. But now that brings up obviously another question. We know that Jesus had a spirit, just as you and I have a spirit.
Right.
So where was his spirit during during that time that his body was in the tomb?
Well, that's a good point, and you know, it is probably a good point to bring up that the spirit does separate from the body.
Right.
And the Bible teaches that actually as well. Over in John 19 is a good example of this. And this is Jesus on the cross in John chapter 19. And in verse 30, it says, when Jesus had received the sour wine, he said, it is finished, and bowing his head, he gave up his spirit.
All right.
So we have a separation there, as you already brought up, of the body and the spirit.
You know, of course, that is what death is, the separation of the spirit, physical death, the separation of the spirit from the body. James, the writer James illustrates this in James chapter 2, verse 26, where he says, "For as the body without the spirit is dead, so faith without works is dead also."
That's a good one.
So there's the definition of physical death. It's the result of the separation of the spirit from the body. All right, so his body was in the tomb of Joseph of Arimathea for the time that he was dead, and his spirit was separated from the body. Now, where did that spirit go?
And that's a good question. Well, I've got Luke, over in Luke chapter 23. I've got a passage here. Luke chapter 23. Some things that Jesus says while he's on the cross. Again,
Sure.
Here he's on the cross. And I'm going to come into the chapter 23 and verse 39. I think is a good place to start. But in 23:39 of Luke, it says, "Then one of the criminals who were hanged blasphemed him," that's Jesus, "saying, 'If you are the Christ, save yourself and us.' But the other answering rebuked him, saying, 'Do you not even fear God, seeing you are under the same condemnation? And we indeed justly, for we receive the due reward of our deeds. But this man has done nothing wrong.' Then he said to Jesus, 'Lord, remember me when you come into your kingdom.' And Jesus said to him, 'Assuredly I say to you, today you will be with me in paradise.'"
All right.
So paradise.
So Jesus was in paradise. That's where his spirit was, his body in the tomb that belonged to Joseph of Arimathea, but his spirit went to paradise. Okay, now I want to bring up another passage that deals with that and see if this is a contradiction or if we can harmonize it.
Okay.
Over in Acts chapter 2, this was on the day of Pentecost, the first Pentecost after Jesus' resurrection from the dead. And he's already, 10 days before this, Jesus ascended on high. That's covered in Acts chapter 1. And now in Acts chapter 2, the Apostle Peter is preaching to the Jews assembled there in the city of Jerusalem on this, one of the great Jewish feast days in which all the Jewish males were expected to come to Jerusalem to worship the Lord. And I'm going to begin reading in verse 25 and read down through verse 29. For David says concerning him, "I foresaw the Lord always before my face, for he is at my right hand, that I may not be shaken. Therefore my heart rejoiced, and my tongue was glad. Moreover, my flesh also will rest in hope." Now I'm reading from the New King James translation. Trevor, you have the same translation, don't you? But I'll tell you what it says in the Old King James, because this might confuse some people. Yeah. In verse 17, "For you will not leave my soul in Hades." Now, the Old King James Version has the word hell there.
Right.
"You will not leave my soul in hell," and that can confuse some people. All right, "You will not leave my soul in Hades, nor will you allow your Holy One to see corruption. You have made known to me the ways of life. You will make me full of joy in your presence. Men and brethren, let me speak freely to you of the patriarch David, that he is both dead and buried, and his tomb is with us to this day. Therefore, being a prophet," I'm reading on down through verse 30, "and knowing that God had sworn with an oath to him that of the fruit of his body according to the flesh, he would raise up the Christ to sit on his throne." Now verse 31, "He foreseeing this spoke concerning the resurrection of Christ, that his soul was not left in Hades," and the Old King James says hell, "nor did his flesh see corruption." So we've got two passages here. Now this is the Apostle Peter preaching on the day of Pentecost, quoting Psalm 16, where he says, and we know he's right on this, that David was prophesying concerning the Christ, and he said, "You will not leave my soul in Hades," Old King James Version hell, and that talking about Christ, that his soul, his spirit, was not left in Hades. But in Luke 23, Jesus told the thief on the cross, "Today you will be with me in paradise." Is that a contradiction?
I don't think so.
Okay, well explain it for us, Trevor.
Well, you know, in the old King James Version here next to it does say hell, but here we have Hades, which is I think a better translation
Yes.
for our time. But even then, Hades can be misunderstood. Here in the text, it's very clear that he's talking about the place of the dead,
All right.
where people go when they die. So, you know, Jesus went where people go when they die.
Right.
In his case, he did say, though, that he went to paradise.
Right. Okay. So, excuse me. So paradise, well, what is paradise then?
You tell me.
All right. I'm sorry, Trevor. I have a problem with my throat right now.
That's all right.
I want to go back over to the book of Luke again. And this time, turn over to Luke chapter 16. And there read verses 22 through 24. Luke chapter 16. This is the story, and oftentimes called a parable. I don't think it really could be classified as a parable. Parables are stories about things in the natural realm that could have occurred but did not actually happen, that illustrate something the spiritual realm. And they're stories, Jesus told many parables. They're stories about things that we're familiar with. The sower sowing the seed, that's something people in Palestine were familiar with. But this is a story about what happens to people after they die. And no one who's alive today knows by experience what happens to people after they die. But at any rate, in Luke chapter 16, beginning in verse 22, so it was that the beggar died and was carried by the angels to Abraham's bosom. The rich man also died and was buried. Now notice, and being in torments in Hades. So the rich man is in torment in Hades. He lifted up his eyes and saw Abraham afar off and Lazarus in his bosom. And I'll read through verse 24. Then he cried and said, Father Abraham, have mercy on me, and send Lazarus that he may dip the tip of his finger in water and cool my tongue, for I am tormented in this flame. So here, the rich man is in Hades, but he's described as being in torment and in the flame, and he needed his tongue to be cooled with just a drop of water. So, all right, let's see if we can harmonize what's going on here. And I'm going to turn this back to Trevor just a minute, see if you don't want to comment on this. That Jesus was in Hades, but he was in paradise. The rich man was in Hades, but he was in torment. How do you harmonize all that?
Well, I'm not going to comment on that, actually.
Okay.
Because, I'm not going to comment on that. But obviously, very clearly, kind of aside from that for me real quick, just paradise, what does that entail? It entails a perfect situation or a good situation.
Right.
But I'll let you
Well,
connect these.
the way I would harmonize it is that Hades is simply where the spirits of dead people go.
Okay.
And it would include, at this time at least, it would include both torment, which was where the rich man was. He was lost. And so he was tormented. But it would also include paradise, a separate realm, where Jesus went, where Lazarus went, where the thief on the cross went. But all of it would be called Hades because it's the realm that is where the spirits go when they're separated from the body. And so all Hades is simply the realm of the dead, where the spirits of dead people go. And it includes where those who are blessed go, which would be called paradise in Luke 23. And it would also include torment, which is where the rich man was. And so it's just the realm of the dead, including both torment and paradise. That's the explanation I would give. Okay. Trevor?
No, that makes sense. I'm in agreement with you on what Hades is. That's all fine. Yeah,
all right.
That makes sense.
All right, so the overall question then is, where did Jesus go when he died?
Yeah.
And so, Trevor, his body went
into the grave.
Where it remained until he was raised.
Right.
His spirit went to
paradise
in
Hades.
Hades. Okay,
yeah.
All right, so that answered the question. Now, I want us to come back to that because we're going to see that this question could get more difficult. But first, let's remind how to be in touch with us and also about the services. Trevor, tell them about Pyatt, please.
Yeah, sure. I worship and preach in Payette there. As you'll see on the screen, that's a picture of the building and also our address. We're on Highway 62 in Payette on the north side of the highway next to the tractor dealership. And you'll see my phone number there, 870-435-2737. And you can call me if you have a question about the program or if you have questions about the Church of Christ or anything in general concerning the Bible. I'd love to discuss those things with you or try to answer your question here on the program.
Okay, very good, Trevor. And of course, if you would like to be in touch with me, Keith Sharp, first of all, the times, well, here's how to be in touch with me. I'm sorry, I got out of order there. The time you could call me at 870-321-5746. And you can email me at keithsharp@suddenlink.net. Or you can write to Post Office Box 263 in Mountain Home, 72654. And real quickly, to remind again of the times of our services, we have our Bible classes for all ages at 10 o'clock on Sunday morning, including for the children. Everybody's invited to those Bible classes. Then we have our worship assemblies at 11 o'clock on Sunday morning and 2 o'clock on Sunday afternoon. We have an assembly and classes at 7 o'clock on Wednesday evening. And of course, we have our ladies' Bible class at 10 o'clock on Wednesday morning. You're invited to those services, particularly you ladies, to the ladies' Bible class. We meet 1 mile south of the Highway 62 412 bypass on Highway 5, the way down to Salesville on the left. And so come out and be with us if you possibly can. All right, Trevor, is there more you wanted to say concerning where Jesus was during the time after his death and before he was ascended back on high?
I'm good myself, yeah, for me.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I'm going to bring up a question that, simply because of some false teaching that people make on this passage that confuses some people. Let's go over to 1 Peter chapter 3. I believe this is a passage that some people misuse, and so let's take a little bit of time to talk about this because it deals with, actually people think it deals with, I don't think the passage really deals with that, where Jesus was during the time that his body was in the tomb, where his spirit was. I'm going to begin in 1 Peter chapter 3, verse 18. For Christ also suffered once for sins, the just for the unjust, that he might bring us to God, being put to death in the flesh, but made alive by the Spirit. Now notice carefully, by whom also he went and preached to the spirits in prison, who formerly were disobedient, when once the divine long-suffering waited in the days of Noah, while the ark was being prepared, which a few, that is 8 souls, were saved through water. I'm going to go ahead and read down through verse 22 to finish the chapter. There's also an antitype. Now this is the New King James Version that I'm reading from. There's also an antitype which now saves us, baptism, not the removal of the filth of the flesh, but the answer of a good conscience toward God through the resurrection of Jesus Christ, who has gone into heaven and is at the right hand of God, angels and authorities and powers, having been made subject to him. Now, here's why I wanted to introduce this. There are those who teach that verses 19 and 20 are talking about the time when Jesus was dead. His body was in the tomb. And they say that his spirit went into the Hadean realm, into the realm of torment. And there he preached to those spirits who were disobedient during the days of Noah, and led apparently some of them to salvation. Well, I disagree with that very strongly. I believe, first of all, that what it's talking about is that he went in a spiritual sense to those people who are in prison, whose souls are now in prison, that is, they're in torment, during the time when they were alive through the preaching of Noah.
Yeah.
Okay, we're in agreement on that.
Oh, yeah.
So I believe that's what that's talking about. Trevor, can you think of some reasons that argument that Jesus went and preached to the lost souls in the Hadean realm does not fit other passages?
Well, not offhand.
Okay.
But to your point of, this preaching was done through Noah, I agree with that. In fact, 2 Peter talks about that. 2 Peter 5 says that God did not spare the ancient world, but saved Noah, one of 8 people, a preacher of righteousness. And so
Very good. So
was
there's
still-
the divine comment on the preaching right there,
Yeah.
by the same author of the book of 1 Peter over
Yeah.
in 2 Peter. I think that's excellent. So that is a good comment on that. Well, there would be a couple of things that I would have to say concerning that. First of all, what that would teach is that there is a second chance after we die.
Right.
And there are those who believe that, well, after we die, there's another chance to make our lives right. That does not harmonize with 2 Corinthians chapter 5, verse 10. In 2 Corinthians chapter 5, verse 10, the Apostle Paul teaches that we shall all stand before the judgment seat of Christ, that each one, this is 2 Corinthians chapter 5, verse 10, that each one may receive the things done in the body, according to what he has done, whether good or bad. So we're not going to be judged by something that's done to us after we die.
Right.
We're going to be judged by what we've done while we're in the body, while we're still alive. So it's not talking about Jesus going to and preaching to lost spirits in the Hadean realm.
Right.
And I believe the other thing that would conflict with is what we've already talked about, is that yes, Jesus was in Hades, his spirit was in the realm of the dead, but that doesn't mean that his spirit was in torment as the rich man was. Because remember, he said in Luke chapter 23 to the thief on the cross, this day you will be with me in paradise. So he didn't go to the realm of torment. He went to the realm of paradise. His body was in the tomb. His spirit was in the Hadean realm in paradise. And then, of course, after the resurrection, they were reunited. That's the best I could do on that, Trevor. So I think that 1 Peter chapter 3 is not talking about Jesus going and preaching to spirits in prison, but rather that through Noah, Jesus had preached to them in a spiritual sense, and that those people that Noah preached to that didn't listen to him, their spirits were at the time that Peter wrote in prison, that is, they were in torment.
Right.
Okay,
Makes sense, yeah.
we're in agreement on that.
Absolutely.
Well, I don't have anything to add concerning where Jesus was during the time. So we have, the next question we have is concerning the confession. Is that what you have down
That's
next?
what I have, yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
So, there's a lot that I want to say on this, and I'm sure there is that Trevor wants to say also. So I'll say, let's get started this evening
Good
on
idea.
the answer to that question.
Yeah.
And then we'll talk further about that on our next program. So we're going to leave that question we were talking about on where Jesus was after his death and before his resurrection. And we'll talk about now, what is the good confession? Trevor, get us started on that, please, sir.
All right, yeah. What is the good confession? I'm going to go to 1 Timothy chapter 6 myself and begin there. 1 Timothy chapter 6, Paul is going to say that Timothy confessed this good confession, and then he's also going to mention the fact that Christ confessed this good confession. So I think it's a good place for us to start. 1 Timothy 6, and I'm going to start in verse 11, just to kind of get the context. Paul says, "But you, O man of God, flee these things and pursue righteousness, godliness, faith, love, patience, gentleness. Fight the good fight of faith, lay hold on eternal life, to which you were also called, and have confessed the good confession in the presence of many witnesses. I urge you in the sight of God, who gives life to all things, and before Christ Jesus, who witnessed the good confession before Pontius Pilate, that you keep this commandment without spot, blameless until the Lord Jesus Christ appearing, which he will manifest in his own time, he who is the blessed and only potentate, the King of kings and Lord of lords, who alone has immortality, dwelling in unapproachable light, whom no man has seen or can see, to whom be honor and everlasting power. Amen." All right, so Timothy made the good confession.
All right, that's verse 12.
Verse 12. Verse 13, Jesus Christ made the good confession.
All right.
Or witnessed the good confession
Okay.
before Pilate. And I think in the context it tells us what that is really.
All right, go ahead.
Well, when we get into the latter portion there of what we read, in verse 15, he talks about Jesus Christ being the King of kings, having, in other words, all authority, all power.
All right.
And that's what the good confession has to do with, because when we go back to the gospel accounts, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, every single account, Jesus witnesses the good confession before Pontius Pilate.
All right. I commend you, Trevor, again for using a good Bible study technique, and I want to commend this to those who are listening to us this evening, that don't just grab a passage out of context.
Yeah.
That would be a wrong way to treat anybody. To take a short, that's the way politicians treat each other, isn't it?
Sometimes,
to
yeah.
take a short statement that is made and take it out of context and make it mean something it doesn't mean, and that the politician didn't intend for it to mean. And people do the Bible that way,
Yeah.
rip a short statement out of context and make it mean something that the inspired writer never meant.
Yeah.
And so Trevor set the context. That's the right way to treat the Scriptures. And so the context here has to do with the confession that Jesus Christ is King, isn't it?
I believe so.
In fact,
Yeah.
King of Kings and Lord of Lords.
Yeah.
And He's presently that. Right now, He's King of Kings.
That's right.
That's not something that He has to wait for a future time to be. He is right now. He's King of Kings and Lord of Lords.
Yeah.
And when did Jesus make that confession or witness that confession?
Yeah, well, like I said, every gospel account covers that. I'm going to go to John chapter 18. John words his account is just a bit different than the other three gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke. Theirs are almost identical, but John's is just a little bit different. But in John 18, and I'm going to start in verse 33 myself, it says, "Then Pilate entered the praetorium again, called Jesus, and said to him, 'Are you the king of the Jews?' Jesus answered him, 'Are you speaking for yourself about this, or did others tell you this concerning me?' Pilate answered, 'Am I a Jew? Your own nation and the chief priests have delivered you to me. What have you done?' Jesus answered, 'My kingdom is not of this world. If my kingdom were of this world, my servants would fight, so that I would not be delivered to the Jews. But now my kingdom is not from here.' Pilate therefore said to him, 'Are you a king then?' Jesus answered, 'You say rightly that I am a king. For this cause I was born, and for this cause I came into the world, that I should bear witness to the truth. Everyone who is of the truth hears my voice.'"
All right.
There's the good confession.
There it is. And notice it had to do with the exact same thing
Yeah,
that Paul mentions in 1 Timothy chapter 6, doesn't it?
good point. Yeah, absolutely.
That Jesus said, "Pilate, you've told the truth. I am the king." And the amazing thing is Pilate appeared to understand what Jesus was talking about.
He did, yeah.
And Pilate did not want Jesus to be, if Pilate had thought Jesus was trying to be a king in competition with Caesar being emperor, then Pilate would have been the first one to crucify him, to demand his crucifixion. But he understood Jesus was not talking about a physical nation, a civil nation being the king of that, but rather He's King of Kings and Lord of Lords. Well, we're running out of time, and I'd really like to get more into this matter of the good confession and what it means to confess that Jesus Christ is King, that He is Lord of Lords. And so, Trevor, if we may, we'll do this in our next program.
Sounds good.
And talk more about that, and I think we could probably spend a whole program talking about that confession, what we're to confess, that Jesus Christ is Lord of Lords and King of Kings. Trevor, anything you'd like to say at the conclusion?
I think that's good. Like you say, since we'll be working on this on the next program, I'll wait.
All right. And I want to encourage those who are watching the program this evening to be in touch with Trevor or me in the ways that we've told you, and let us know what your questions are so that we can give you an answer from the Bible for the questions that you have. Thank you so much for listening. Thank you so much for watching, and please tune in next time.
Thank you for watching Search the Scriptures. If you have a Bible question or comment, you may call 870-321-5746, email keithsharp@suddenlink.net, or write Keith Sharp at P.O. Box 263, Mountain Home, Arkansas 72654. And your question will be answered on the air. Be sure to watch next week at the same time for another edition of Search the Scriptures. Until then, the Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord make His face shine upon you and be gracious to you. The Lord lift up His countenance upon you and give you peace.